Hey everybody, it's Evan from MethodCast at getmethod.com, and I wanted to do a tutorial on how to create a really interesting curtain wall type roof structure that's kind of a swooping organic roof. And we're going to use Cinema 4D to pull this off today, and we're going to look at quite a few tools inside that program. The project that struck me when I looked at it was called Fiera di Milano, and it's an exhibition and convention center in Milan, Italy. And it's a really interesting structure because it's an all-glass organic roof, and it kind of funnels down into these indoor gardens, and it comes down and touches the ground and kind of swoops around and flies up above people. And it's a really interesting structure. I'd love to go there someday and check it out. So I was thinking, how could we achieve this? And after playing around in Cinema for a while, I figured out a really cool way, and there's some really interesting tools in there that I wanted to show you anyways, so we're going to look at how to use them to create an architectural model like this. So a combination of HyperNURBS, Atom Array, soft selections, there's quite a few things we're going to be talking about today, and then rendering it out so that it looks realistic. So this should be a pretty cool tutorial. I hope you like it. So let's get started. So here I have a template file that I created, and basically I just have an infinite floor, and I have a sky object, and right now I have the sky turned off just so that it isn't visually obtrusive. What I always want to do when I start off in Cinema with the HyperNURBS is I'm either going to start with a plane or a cube. In this case I'm going to just start with a plane, and I'm just going to pull it up in the air and just kind of resize it. And the size of these divisions in the plane are kind of important, because when you're using HyperNURBS, you'll see in a moment here when I start pushing and pulling these around to create a more advanced geometry, this would make for too much detail. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the number of segments down here. I'm going to go 5 in that direction and 10 in this direction, so that it's a lot simpler piece of geometry. And once you've done that, we're ready to turn this into a HyperNURBS object. So the first thing that I would do is tap the C key with the plane selected, and what that does is it turns it into a normal polygons object, and it's no longer a parametric plane as it were before. So then I'm going to add the HyperNURBS object to this, and what that's going to do is kind of smooth it out, and you'll see why we're going to do that here in a second. If you hold down the Alt key or the Option key, if you're on Mac or Windows, and you click on HyperNURBS, it will just apply it to whatever object has been selected already. And you can see what that did is it smoothed out the corners of the plane. And this plane is going to become our roof structure. So I'm going to click on the plane object because this is what I really want to manipulate. And if I go into polygon selection mode, you can see now I can select all of the original polygons that were on the plane itself. So if I select one, watch what happens when I push it. You can see that it is a smoothing algorithm. And this is called subdivision surface modeling in some programs. In some other programs it's called box modeling. And in Cinema it's called HyperNURBS. And basically what it does is it smooths out, and you can see it's kind of a magnetic almost type of a feel. So you can see how I can push and pull this very easily, and I can start to make this sheet act more like a piece of rubber almost. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to push this down a little bit by grabbing that vertical axis, and then I'm going to hold down the D key, or tap the D key, which is extrude. And extrude is a little bit different than it is in a program like SketchUp or Bonsai, those other 3D programs, where this will actually take this polygon and offset it in a direction, but it won't leave the original one. So watch what happens if I just click and drag. You can see it actually offset a new face, and it's pushing it in whatever direction I move my mouse. So I'm going to move my mouse to the left, which pushes it down, and I'm going to do it again and push it down even further until I get down to the ground, roughly. So you can see what I just did is I created this funnel, which is the beginning of the structure that we're going to be creating. And so the thing I don't need is I don't need that bottom polygon anymore. See how it's kind of rounding off at the bottom? So I'm just going to tap the delete key. And what that did is it just leaves a hole in the bottom of this thing now. Okay, so we just have this funnel going down. All right, so now I just need to start tweaking this form and just kind of getting that funnel the shape I want. So the first thing I want to do is I want to select this ring, or this loop of edges right around here. So I can go into edge mode. And you can see how I can select an edge at a time now. Well, if I type the shortcuts UL, it puts me into loop selection mode. And see how now I can click on that and it selects the entire loop all at once. And I just want to scale that one up and make it a little bit, the opening of the funnel larger. Okay, and then I'm going to orbit down and I'm going to do the same thing. UL, tap on this one. I'm going to scale this one up a little bit as well, just so my funnel is more of a funnel shape. And I'm going to grab the bottom one again, so UL, and select this one. And first I'm going to move this one back up to the ground plane. And I'm just kind of eyeballing things right now. And then I'm going to scale it so it's even more of a funnel. Okay, so I'm starting to get that funnel shape that I really want to get. Okay, so now in our original image here, you can see how this funnel does not come straight down to the ground. It kind of goes off to the side. And so that's the next thing I'm going to do here. So I'm going to push and pull these around. You can kind of see how flexible this is here. Again, if I just type UL and I get that loop and I move it, you can see I can pull this thing in any direction. Now, kind of a problem with just grabbing one loop is you see how this loop didn't really move. It's kind of staying where it was. I'm only moving the bottom one. It moves a little bit, but not much. So what I want to do is I want to turn on smooth selection or soft selection here. And so if I go into the move tool and I go down here, I can enable soft selection. And you can see now I get this yellow gradient, and that you can see now is moving in a different type of way, where it's selecting this one and then the weight is falling off towards the top away from that with a linear fall off. And I can adjust the radius, so if I want more or less. Okay, so you can see here that I can affect more or less of the geometry depending on the strength. So I'm going to kind of pull this in a couple different directions so it's more like that Fiera di Milano project, and just make this a little bit more interesting. Right, and then the other thing I could do is I could actually rotate this, and you can see I can start to twist that geometry as well, which is kind of cool. So depending on the type of structure you want. Basically what I'm looking at when I look at this is these blue lines, the direction that they're going, because that is going to end up turning into my structure in a little bit here. Okay? So that is basically how we create that funnel form. You can see that was really fast and easy. Now, a couple other things that I can do. Again, I'm just going to leave soft selection turned on. You can see when I grab these points, I can start to pull them up and down. And I like using soft selection with this because it makes for a really nice organic fluid shapes. So if I grab a spot in the middle here, and I might turn that radius down a little bit and start to tweak this geometry a little more, a little less, depending on what I'm after. So maybe I'll pull that down a little bit more. You can see I can really start to pull that down, start to create some really interesting shapes. So that could come down and even hit the ground if we wanted it to, which is what it does in some of these other photos, like there, where it comes down and hits the ground. So you can see that just kind of gets buried into the ground. So if I grab that point, I can pull it down. Now another thing you can do is you can actually change the weighting of the hyperNURBS. If you hold down the period key and slide your mouse right or left, it actually changes the weighting. So you can see I can go to a sharp point or I can have a rounded edge. And so if I hold down that period key while I slide it, I might be able to get a little bit different of a shape, maybe something that I want by doing that. Corners work really well for that. So again, holding down the period You can see I can slide that and get a perfectly sharp corner, which is kind of what this project actually has. So depending on the look you're after, you might want to change the weight of those corners and change that just to sharpen all those edges out. Okay, well that's good enough I think for the roof, and I'm just going to leave it like that now so we can see we're starting to get a pretty cool look here for this really pretty amazing structure. And what I can do now is I am going to show you how to create an instance of this so that we have structure that follows along with the shape exactly. And this is a really cool trick inside of Cinema 4D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my HyperNURBS, and you can see here when I click on HyperNURBS I get a completely different division. The plane has a very loose set of divisions, and the HyperNURBS has quite a bit more divisions. And that is all based on the number of subdivisions. So if I go down to 1, you can see how now it kind of matches the original plane as far as the number of divisions. I'm going to leave that on 2, but when it renders, it would actually render at a higher resolution. I'm going to knock those down so that they're exactly the same. Okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this HyperNURB that I've got, and I'm going to just imagine that this is my glass surface, and what I'm going to do is I already have a glass material applied here, or set up. I'm just going to drag and drop it onto my object. You can see now this is a really cool piece of glass. I can see through it. I'm going to instance this HyperNURBS, and what an instance is it allows me to have an exact copy. Okay, so see now it says HyperNURBS instance, and I can just rename this. This is going to be my structure. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an atom array, so again holding down the Alt key or the Option key, to apply that right to that structure. And you can see what that did is it applied this really cool sticks and ball connection type of a structural system to this thing, and it just does it immediately. It's super fast. So what I'm going to do is I actually want to modify this. I'm going to take this down to like 0.75 on the radius, and I'm also going to take the sphere radius down the same. Unfortunately you can't just turn the spheres off. I wish you could, but you can't. And then as far as the number of subdivisions, I'm just going to go with 4 so that I get a lighter weight geometry. So check this out. Now I have a set of structural elements that follows the HyperNURBS object exactly. And now this is the really powerful part. Okay, obviously when we design something it's never done, and we always have to go back and modify it. So if I go back to my original plane, grab a point, like let's go down here underneath it, and let's grab this point again right there. And you can see my atom array structure is following it. Look, when I move it up and down, the atom array moves with it still. See that? So what's so cool about that is that I can continue to manipulate the structure, make changes to it. I could make the structure thicker if I wanted to. Let's go up to like 1.5 just to thicken it up a little bit. Oops, I guess I need to do that to the spheres first, and then I can do it to the radius of the cylinders to thicken that up. And again, if I just grab on the original plane, which is what is driving the HyperNURBS, if I just grab one of these, I'll zoom in so you can really see it here, and I move that original plane, the structure moves right along with it. So it's what I would call a fully parametric object. It's really cool. So let's go back and just knock that back down again. 0.75. That just seems nicer to me. And I'm just going to go ahead and find a cool angle to look at this thing at. Okay, so one of the things that is a little bit different about the Milano one is you can see that all of these polygons are triangulated. And the reason that they're triangulated is because that gives us a perfectly flat plane of glass. So if we have quadrants like these, and that is curving in 2 directions, that is a very different beast when it comes to building it, because we have glass curving in multiple directions, and that gets really expensive. And so obviously that's something that you probably want to try to avoid. And so what I'm going to do here is show you now, once you've got your roof form kind of set exactly how you want it, what we're going to do is we're going to triangulate this. And in order to triangulate it, unfortunately, we get to lose our parametric ability of this roof. So you kind of have to have your geometry set at this point. Now what I would do is just duplicate these so you could come back to them later on. But if I go to the original atom array structure right here, and I type the C key, okay, and you can see how that turned into common geometry, and I'm going to do it again. I'm going to tap C one more time. Now it is actually just some normal geometry, and it's no longer parametric as long as we have this little triangle here. And what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to go in and I'm going to triangulate it using the triangulate command, and there we go. And as soon as I triangulate the plane, because it's a child of the atom array object, you can see that it actually automatically applies the atom array to that. So it's very cool. Like I said, if I go back to the original HyperNURBS plane and I grab one of these, you'll see it is now a separate piece from the structural element. Okay, so we lost that parametric ability of the roof, unfortunately, but in order to get the triangles, we had to do that. Okay, so depending on where you're at in the phasing of your design, you might want to hold off on actually triangulating it until the very last moment, or you just need to keep the original object around, which we could always just duplicate again, instance it, and then add an atom array to it, and then re-triangulate it later on in the game. Okay, so now that we've got this roof, let's just take a look at a rendering real quick. So I'm just going to jump into, turn my sky back on so that we can see it here. And I've just used a sky preset, which is a sky object right here. And I applied one of their presets to it. I tweaked it a little bit. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit render and see what this thing looks like. And I am using, just so you know, I am using global illumination so that I get a really cool looking render. And I always set the GI mode when I'm doing still images to IR plus QMC. And my anti-aliasing, this is also something that's kind of important. I up the minimum level to 2x2 so I get nice clean edges in the rendering. We'll get more into rendering stuff later on in the tutorials. But I'm just going to render it here and let's see how it looks. So I'm going to let this go for a little while. Because I'm using global illumination, it is going to take a few minutes to do. So I'm going to pause my recording and I'm going to come back to this when it's done. Alright, so we're back and this is the final rendering, and you can see that the structure and the glass meets up perfectly along the edges, and it's segmented properly, so that it's nice straight edges so that we don't have any bends. It's a little bit more realistic that way. Alright, so just kind of as a summary, HyperNURBS to create the fluid form, and then we use instancing combined with the atom array to create the structure, and then we made that a polygon object so that we could triangulate it. And it stays parametric for quite a while. We can always change the size of the structural members at any time because the atom array is a separate object. And it stays parametric up to the point at which we need to triangulate it so that it gets the proper breakdown. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you can get a lot out of it. It's a pretty cool system once you figure out how it works, and it's very useful for all kinds of curtain walls and structural roofs and anything where you want a structure to follow along a surface and keep it parametric. So I'll see you on the next method cast, and please leave comments for me in the comments. Bye.